My being here on the stage has nothing to do with concept or idea of a convert. Rather, that I would like to inspire people through themselves, by themselves. Spirituality is a particular term which actually means dealing with intuition. Spirit is not in the sense of hard liquor, or spirit in the sense of ghosts, but spirituality in the sense of a spirit of personal discovery. In the theistic tradition, there is still a notion of clinging into a word. That word could be a primordial utterance, logos, bija, whatever. From that point of view, that we try to put some kind of time-lapse situations to reality by providing very pleasant case history. The sacredness begin at the beginning and then begin to permeate holiness. In the tradition of non-theism, however, it is very direct that the case history are not particularly important. What is actually important is here and now. That it is what it is. It is here right now that we have problems of all kinds. And theism tend to put overlay of security. A certain act is regarded as displeasing to divine principles. A certain act is regarded as pleasing for the divine whatever. But in a non-theism, that we don't reject anything, or for that matter, we don't indulge in anything particularly, but we try to use and experience what is available there on the spot. Now is definitely now. There's no point in thanking that the past did exist, that we could have now. And that now is not particularly pleasant. I'm not talking about mystical experience of some kind, but we are talking now as just a simple now. Is everybody's experiencing right this moment, this very moment, a very simple now. This is now. Nothing mystical, just now, very simple, straightforward, ordinary, common now. And from that nowness, however, arises a sense of intelligence, always, that you are constantly interacting with the reality one by one, spot by spot, constantly. That we inherit a basic intelligence, we actually experience fantastic precision always in the nowness, that we find where the problems are, where the promises are. In the nowness, we find discipline, but we haven't been in the now properly for a long time. We are threatened by the now, so we jump to the past or the future. We theorize this and that in the future, and we read our own autobiography of the past when we are bored or apprehensive, paying attention to the materials that exist in our life, such rich life that we lead, including the boredom. Our life is full of all kinds of things which are spectacular, colorful, boring, painful. All these choices takes place all the time, but none of them are regarded as bad or good per se. Everything we experience are unconditional experience. They don't come along with a label by saying this is regarded as bad, or this is good, love, hate, all kinds of things. But we experience them, but we don't actually pay heed to them properly. We don't actually regard that as that we are going somewhere. We regard that as a hassle, waiting to be dead. That's the problem. And that is not trusting the nowness properly, that what is actually experienced now possessed a lot of powerful things, lots of them. It is so powerful that we can't face it. Therefore, we have to borrow from the past, invite future all the time. And maybe that's why we seek religion. Maybe that's why we march in the street. Maybe that's why we complain to the society. Maybe that's why we vote for the presidents. It's quite ironical. Very funny indeed. But however, there are problems, of course. The problems seem to begin in having too many things at once, too many luxury, too many immigrant gurus or the swamis or the roshis or what have you, and too many books being printed, written every day as book on spirituality comes through. Those situations are problematic, not because in themselves are particularly unworthy or unholy, or they are in themselves maybe possess great gem, but nevertheless how we actually relate with them is problematic. It's definitely a problematic situation. For the very reason we borrow all kinds of stuff so we could shield off now. We cease to learn, but we demand babysitters and bottles and diapers, right and left, in the name of spirituality, in the name of a sociological situation, name of economy, name of a parental love affair, whatever you have. And we are somewhat grown up, at least crudely speaking, we are toilet trained, but nevertheless, in the fundamentally, we are still wearing disposable diapers, Kimbees, whatever called, particular brand. Somebody fills up your bottle, and we constantly suck it. We suck harder when we get nervous, and we call that a practice. Occasionally we go to some spiritual teacher and hang out with them and kick them, vomit on them, shit on them, demand food from them, and that is babysitter. Basically, if I may say so, presently you are watching some form of a Sesame Street. Here we are. Reason why we can't actually grow up is because we hang on to the present, we hang on to the past and the future so much. That seems to be one of the problematic situations. If we can actually transcend our infantile situation completely, fully, and thoroughly, that we will be able to see the first level of prajna. And prajna is a Sanskrit word, and the Tibetan word equivalent of it is shirap, which literally means super knowledge. Pra is super, extra. Jna meaning knowing. She in Tibetan meaning knowing. Rap meaning better, the best. But in this case, we are not talking about the best in the sense of there is this inferior qualities, and this is superior in terms of conditional terms, particularly prajna, super knowledge, because there's none better. It is its own proof. It is in its own way free and fantastic and very magnificent, without qualifications. If you depend on any kind of qualifications or conditions, then the situation might be proved the best, the better, but still it depends on a relative reference, so therefore it is somewhat inferior in the long run. So, prajna, super knowledge, which is not particularly extraordinary thing, it is somewhat super knowledge because it is unconditional. It is not depends on the laws and norms, formalities of ethics of ego, confused ego, or ignorance, or aggression, or passion for that matter. So therefore, it is becoming very basic. So basicness of prajna, or the clear seeing, we could use as literal or free translations, clear seeing precisely, somewhat, which is sense of seeing the phenomena world of now is fantastic reference point, learning process, learning situation we have right now here. If we reject that, we have no way of educating ourselves because we have nothing to begin. It is like if you don't have a pair of arms, you can't even write. If you don't have a pair of eyes, you can't even read. It's simple as that. But we have a pair of arms, we have a pair of eyes, we have our intelligence, because why? Because we have our pain and pleasure, we have our hassles and bustles and the problems that exist in our life. Is vivid enough to learn from it. According to Buddhist tradition, that's known as the living teaching, the Dharma in everyday life. Dharma, which meaning teachings of Buddha, Buddha Dharma. And the Buddha Dharma is based on two categories: scripture, books that's been written over 2,500 years of a Buddhist reign, and the other one is experience that are also connected with that scriptural learning for 2,500 years. So information is not regarded as a command particularly, it's just simply suggestion. Information is like the red light in the traffic that tells you dangerous to cross. Once you realize it is dangerous to cross, then the experience goes with it. Either you're trying to obey it or you zoom. And then you get to reduce yourself into a scrap for the dump yard. Usually that happens Those are the two types of experience we're talking about, the information and experience put together. The experience that we have here and the information that we have here in our ordinary everyday life, living in particularly infamous New York City, has lots of stuff happening, taking place, or any other state maybe, which contains the living example of Dharma. Dharmas can only be seen in nowness. Accidents can only occur now, not in the past or future, unless you're watching a movie or something on the television. But actual accidents can occur now, right now. Life situations from their point of view are not regarded as problematic particularly at all, but actually workable. Fantastic learning process, collecting information, a learning process. And then we have what's known as the second stage of prajna, which is a thinking process, contemplating, understanding. In this case, contemplation is not regarded as like meditation, and the contemplation in the sense of just purely thinking. That go over those experiences, and we begin to find out how we rushed through traffic jam and run over red light. Why did we do that? I had a prior meeting, I have appointment, or I'm pissed off at the city, or my life, or myself, and my boyfriend and I are having an argument, and I just put my foot on the gas pedal and went off, what have you. All kinds of problems of that kind of nature, which is a fantastic demonstration of Dharma, truth. What could happen, actually, if you follow the real situation of that nature, the living Dharma, that what kind of problems that we come up with. I'm sorry to bore you, but I got to finish my story, so to speak. There's a problem there. So, learning is not so much of reason why I put my foot in the gas pedal because I had bad childhood. That's too much of Freudian or something or other, even partially Jungian. And if you go around that way, there's some kind of problem of that. You refer everything to book concepts rather than personal experience. And when the personal experience actually occurred, it becomes very real. The living Dharma exists there. And then we go to the next stage of third prajna, which is the practice, meditation, in which we begin to work on the case histories that we discovered from us, about us, constantly. What have we found out about ourselves properly, fully, and work with them. And practice meditation at that point is to get into a competent teacher who would not bullshit, so to speak, or who would not regard you as their prey, who would not regard you as their subject in accordance with the principles of Mussolini, Hitler, or Mao Zedong, what have you. But somebody who is actually can work with you, and teacher would not lock himself in a closet either, to have his own thing going, and then you come out of the closet and try to be gracious and kind, either. Teacher that can actually can show you share, maybe if he's not all that advanced, he could also share his neurosis, his journey with you, and you could work with that particular person, who are what's basically known as a spiritual friend, Gebishinin, Kalyana Mitra. Simply, that you can relate with the eye-to-eye level. That seems to be the basic point. And beyond that, also a group of students who work with that kind of situation together, in turn, that Kalyana Mitra, the spiritual friend, does not become the and only person in the bottleneck that you have to process by and through it alone, that you also get a group of membership, Sangha, a community begin to evolve, and that begin to expand, ferment the atmosphere of sanity that which is in the air is transmitted on person completely. And with that particular discipline from competent teacher and competent fellow brothers and sisters in the practice, work together, discipline, individual discipline, and group discipline, which is also individual discipline in some sense. Individuals put together makes group, usually, naturally. When we say crowd, that is a lot of people put together which says crowd, rather than one person is a crowd. So individuals practicing in their own way, and lots of individuals put together makes group meditation, group practice. And purpose of meditation is not so much to, again, forget all these problems that you've discovered before, but work with what is there, having some sense of sanity, and having some sense of discipline, having some sense of warmth, softness, loving attitude to oneself to begin with, and generates to others. And sitting practice meditation, as we usually call sitting practice meditation, which is formal sitting on the meditation cushion, which is a way of churning out case histories or problems and fantasies and everything on the surface completely. And by doing so, you begin to make friends with yourself, you begin to realize what you're doing, who you are, what it's all about. Simply, you begin to find what you are, what it's all about, very simply. And by doing so, you begin to also realize that you can't put everything into pigeonholes by this is good category, that's bad category anymore. So we begin to realize that fundamentally, man is not a condemned person. There's no such thing as fall of man at that point. It's just individual temporary neuroses that are collected, which we become immune to it or work with it and become addicted to it. But it can be workable. And we go on. The techniques of sitting practice meditation are very simple, ordinary, extremely ordinary, simple. There are no visualizations or no ceremonies, rituals. There are no jingling bells or sounding the trumpets particularly. But simply be on your sitting cushion, safu, simply being there, and take delight in one's boredom, which is you are imitating the Buddha himself, who sat under the tree in the bank of Narayana for 6 years and taking appreciation of his boredom. That's what we're trying to do, is trying to emulate Buddha himself. Since he is able to do it, it is possible that we also can do it too. Although there's gaps of centuries and social problems involved, but nevertheless, a mind never changes. It is one mind, a similar mind, and same problems. Passion is and aggression is always there. And if he was able to work that way, so we will be able to do so too. That's what traditionally known as take refuge to the Buddha as an example. The Tibet's great yogi Milarepa was once asked by his disciple by saying that you must be great incarnation of some great being because you attain enlightenment in one lifetime. And Milarepa said, that is a great insult that you can come up with. I thought I'm setting myself as an example and practicing myself that an ordinary human being like me can actually attain enlightenment in one lifetime. And if I have to qualify it with incarnations and all that bullshit, so to speak, that I'm so disturbed. So that's the perfect thing that we are talking about here, is sitting practice meditation is not regarded as particularly way of salvation, but a way of working with ourselves fully, properly. And prajna of sitting practice, that point, is immense, that we begin to realize all kinds of problems. In the course of my 5 years of being in this country and having interviewed numerous people who are students of mine and students of others, that people come up with all kinds of infinite problems. Starting from having a problem with the cockroaches in your sitting room, meditation room, up to problems with their ego trip. It's numerous, but nevertheless, that prajna or clear seeing does not necessarily mean to say that you have to become intellectually inclined and to prove point by point, more likely to experience a sense of simplicity. Sense of simplicity. You sit, breathe, that's it. That's the first step of prajna of those three lots. How to become actually a student. There are more prajnas, but maybe if I've been talking whole night, you probably have a difficulty in hearing each other. You might snore and fall asleep. And the interesting point about 3 stages: experiencing nowness, experiencing sense of thinking, and experiencing sense of actual practice of meditation. Very simple one. All of those situations worked with a sense of critical judgment of the whole thing, that nobody's being purely sucked in or indoctrinated into the trips of all kinds, particularly. They've been simply included in the vision of enlightenment, but there's a long way to go, very long way to go. At that point, sitting practice of meditation is regarded as one of the essential practice of all. Simply slow down and sit and be simple, straightforward in the simplicity, a directness in the simplicity. And once we begin to actually do that, your small mind begins to expand into a larger mind, greater mind. And your little stingy approach to yourself has become very opulent and rich. You might think you are inadequate, but still you begin to realize, if you can work with the simplicity, you begin to realize how adequate you are. At that point, what is known as the first glimpse of realizing Buddha nature, that first glimpse of realizing that we are not particularly condemned as lost tribes. We are going to discuss tonight myth of freedom. Guess what? In some sense, there seems to be a contradictory term that freedom shouldn't be myth. If it is so, bad news, terrible news. There's something we seek for, something we constantly look for. It's turned out to be myth. And then it ceases to become freedom. As a matter of fact, actually at that point, we want to be the freedom reality. At the minute when we leave our home, our parents, our associations with that particular world, you would like to gallivant to the ocean, dance in the countryside, be crazy, do anything you want, and nobody can say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. But somehow, such frivolous exit might lead us into a further imprisonment. That's why freedom is purely myth. We can do 20,000 million things that we want to do all the time. And we can do it ourselves. Having done every one of them, so what? Then what? Back to square one, feels more sick, more desperate, looking for another means to explore one's freedom, which actually doesn't exist at that point, exist at all, as freedom as such. Therefore it is myth. We indulge possibilities of getting into spiritual trips of all kinds. We try this, we try that, we try millions or trillions of other things on the side, hoping that will produce some sense of even 5 minutes relaxation, 5 minutes liberation. At a certain point we begin to give up the idea of the total gigantic freedom, but we simply look for pinch by pinch. If I could get something that I can get into, I can look into, that I'll be at least relieved from torture, turmoil, speed, nervousness, irritating desires of all kinds. But still, even 5 minutes is very hard to come by. It's not a laughing matter, I suppose, but on the other hand, it is quite ironic that there's some kind of problem takes place. Real problem takes place. Therefore, freedom is myth. The naivety it brings myth of freedom. Anxiety brings myth of freedom. Trying to hang on to a personalized, personally edited dogma brings myth of freedom.
and also trying to latch oneself into a personalized pleasure. And picking up the menu in the spiritual supermarket, of course, brings the greatest joke, the cosmic joke, and the greatest myth of freedom of all. Naturally, that's the obvious myth of freedom, that we feel that we can shop around a lot and we get the better products. More we buy, more we waste our money and energy running back and forth several supermarkets, and our energy gets constantly drained on the process of search, process of shopping, comparing the delicacies of merchandise as well as the feasibility of price. It is like the movie known as Mad World, or something like that. Look for treasure of $5 million or something. It is precisely the same kind of approach, which is the myth of freedom, the biggest joke, seem to be. According to the Buddhist tradition, there are several levels of even getting into the path has a different myth of freedom takes place. The myth of freedom at the first level is to see through the basic myth of freedom and the basic humor and the basic naivety that the notion of a spiritual materialism has to be cut through first of all. With one's critical intelligence, we slowly and begin to get through, surely begin to get it through. Some kind of understanding that reality around us consists of constant insecurity and constant temporariness all the time, which is known as understanding of impermanence, transitoriness, that we can't actually say this is the longest and the most permanent, secure insurance policy anymore. Wherever we stick, trying to understand, trying to settle, so that we are completely secured, and that situation becomes unreal. Understanding that is very painful and very easy to talk about, of course, but nevertheless, when we actually in it, at it, when we actually understand it, very disheartening that when we search for spiritual journey, popularly speaking, that we are looking for something permanent, eternal happiness of some kind, and realizing, stepping onto the Buddhist path to begin with, and the first good news, or the bad news, whatever, that we hear, is the transitoriness of everything. The notion of a permanency and the notion of eternity tend to bring us into a deception. We begin to feel we got it. We would like to stick to it. And we keep it very eagerly, very greedily. And nothing very much happens at that point. everything begin to dissolve, as if you are holding an ice cream in your hand and thinking that I will only eat this finally when I have a moment of my happiness, and you're waiting for it for a whole day. And towards the end of the day, the happiness never comes, but ice cream also dissolves in your hand. The first notion of seeing through, the first level of myth freedom is seeing through the permanency. Nothing is permanent. Nothing remains. Solid situation in our life. That tend to bring empty-hearted possibilities. We feel that the rug is pulled under our feet. The empty-heartedness, which is interesting conclusion. And personally, we feel empty-hearted, not only intellectually alone, that the tables and chairs and the buildings and the road and the earth, sky, the sun and the moon, and everything that exists around us that we believe always predictable, begin to turn upside down. We begin to question everything that we perceive, experience. There is a notion of that everything is shifting constantly. That nothing really actually can lay hands on anymore. Which is cutting through the first basic solidity, which otherwise we feel that everything's absolutely solid and permanent and basic, that we can actually lay our hands on, say, look, this is real. I can hear it, I can feel it. But seeing it, feeling it, hearing it doesn't mean anything very much. You're just hearing it, seeing it, feeling it. There's something more than that behind it. Does that hearing provide you with notion of a real solidity in your mind at all? Not. It doesn't usually. It dissolves. Unfortunately or fortunately or whatever, the only thing that actually exists is the continuation of reality, which comes along with pain, suffering. According to Buddhist tradition, it is known as dukkha. Suffering, pain, is the first discovery of the Buddha as one of the Four Noble Truths. It's the suffering. Suffering. Dukkha does not necessarily mean suffering in the sense of that you feel a terrible headache or you suddenly feel hurt. You had a cut on your body. But all-pervasive suffering, which continues all the time, constantly. There is a sense of suffering, there is a sense of airiness, there is a sense of continual, some kind of trouble, profound pain, which doesn't hurt heavy-handedly, that which might cause you to call the doctors or the ambulance particularly, but ongoing pain, always. We feel that we experience immense pleasure in our lives. We had a nice dinner, great time we had, visited the museum, saw fantastic things. You can lie in the beach and a beautiful sunshine, beautiful day, but nevertheless, underneath all those, there is a still tinge of some kind of fundamental thorn or splinter which hasn't been removed. And that is actually all pervasive with every one of us here. That particular kind of splinter and a thorn experience is not only to the freaked out ones alone, only to the broken-hearted ones alone, but everybody we have that. The more we enjoy the pleasure, the more we have that. Higher we go in pleasure, bliss, and the more we experience that constantly. We carry along with us, along with our shadows. You might say, what has that got to do with the Buddhism? What is enlightenment about that? Well, maybe we begin to see a corner of our life very clearly, properly. Once we begin to detect, instead of blaming the society, the world, and the whole lot, we begin to find and begin to feel that we have to do something to ourselves and try to deal with that, the fundamental primordial thorn. You have to do something about it. And sometimes you think this is only my problem. Others don't seem to have any problems. They seem to go along very happily in their lives and quite carefree, and they seem to enjoy their lives. And maybe it's my own personal problems. You might think that way too. But however, it is turned out to be not only one's own peculiarities produce that problem. It is a universal problem, always. Often you think you could cry like an infant on those pain. But we are too reserved to do so. Often we think we could actually freak out completely and exasperate and freak out, then might come to your senses. But somehow still the same thing. And we go to various treatment and therapies, of course, and we fight with the pillows and what have you, knock walls. And we break the utility plates and cups and things in the kitchen and knock reflections for ourselves in the mirror and punch them and all the rest of it. But still, those things are purely done by purpose of treatment alone. So somehow happens to be not real life, but it's acting out. And taking part in a theater doesn't seem to be purely the treatment alone. So we are bounded in this life of ours, in our body, reality. This body seems to be a very interesting body, which has limbs, head, heart, brain, but at the same time, it seems to be just a box that we're stuck in our body. We seem to produce our own imprisonment. But at the same time, that solidity is also turned out to be very empty. Doesn't seem to exist very much. The solidness is equally emptiness, nevertheless. More we talked about solidness and perceiving the solidness, the perception of a solidness is purely mind's conception. Who imprisoned us? Nobody. Did you imprison yourself? Maybe so. So who are you? Well, then you have flexibility. And who are you? Well, it seemed to be me, my name is Joshimed, and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, What is it that makes us to stick to this alone? There seems to be some kind of something in the bottom of our heart that we don't really want to give up. And there is some little thing that we want to hang on to. We seem to love that, whatever that is. We seem to really adore it. Just simply love it. We want to hang on to this little thing. What is that little thing? Of course, the Freudians, Jungians would have all sorts of rich answers to those things. But then we become a philosopher, psychologist, or rather than experiencer or practitioner. We could borrow people's idea, of course, but then actually it doesn't seem to help very much. Really, what is this that we hang on to? What is this that we don't want to let go? That we feel that we are suspended between our lives like we are in the middle of a parachute. That parachute, just the chute is opened, we are suspended in the air. And what is the umbilical cord there between the chute and your body? What's hanging together? What is actually hanging us together there? What is that? Well, it's not my table, it's not my spoons, forks, knives, my house, my sports jacket, my tie, my tights, my underwears, my glasses, my hair, my eyes, my father, my mother, my brother, my lover, my hands, my legs, my body, my heart, my brain. Every one of them have names, seem to be removed from that little thing that we're hanging on to. We've been told, of course, in the school, that if you destroy your heart or brain, you don't survive. But beyond that, how much we know? What does really mean survival? Actually being on the spot of hanging on to that little thingy. That is the myth of freedom. Absolutely. What else could it be? That kind of attachment is very tight, very difficult to unloosen. Unless we change the gear shift from the next stage, which is known as the development of compassion, karuna, sympathy attitude, which is like putting water. When we begin to develop some sense of sympathy, rather than regard them as hang-ups, rather than regarding your myth of freedom as a hang-up or problem, it begins to make sense, more sense. We need sympathy, real sympathy, affectionate attitude towards ourselves, that this problem is no longer a problem. It is very simply just the experience of security, of losing something. Losing what? Something or other. Losing warmth, of course. Losing warmth and sympathy and friendliness to ourselves, personally. If we are not friendly to ourselves, from that angle, we feel we are still attached to this little thing. We can't quite get off, but we would like to rid of it at the same time, called a compassion, karuna. And from that notion of karuna or compassion, of course, we begin to realize that there's nothing to be feared, particularly nothing to be paranoid about anything, particularly, and nothing also particularly need for be protective about ourselves either at the same time. So no one to protect, no one to be particularly built up or secured. A sense of enormous relaxation takes place. Just basic freedom takes place, which also still a myth of freedom. Very much so. But closest we could get in discussing the myth of freedom, and we've gone through 4 stages tonight discussing the myth of freedom. The first one is what's known as the impermanence, which begin to teach us to realize that nothing is eternal. And the second one teaches us that nothing is always pleasurable, which begin to help us to realize that we can't hang on to purely pleasure alone. And the third ones begin to teach us the notion of emptiness, which allows us to realize that we don't actually have to construct things for our own sake. And the fourth one, which teaches us that egolessness, that there's nothing to hang on to, which only comes from a sense of sympathy and a sense of appreciation of ourselves, a sense of friendliness to ourselves. If you like to ask questions, you're welcome.